So
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah. Okay, we'll try.
so you present first the overview of the project, and I present the more technical parts. That's
Stuff,
it.
and then the performance perspective and
Okay.
videos. Okay. Yeah.
Ja, så i midten av denne presentasjonen. Ja, supert. Vi var bandet i går, ja. Og det vel herlig, det. Når det lokalt her.
Skal vi switches tilbake igjen til presentasjonen etterpå, eller?
Ikke samme...
Nei,
hvis de ber om det. Jeg spurte i stad. Hvor vil du ta den? Nei, ta den. Ja, da har vi det. Nei, det to da. Nei, jeg ser det sånn. Skal vi ha to da? Ja.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this second day of the Live Interfaces conference. We're starting out with a wonderful session now, chaired by Diana Lindberg, and she will take over from here.
Thank you and good morning. It's a pleasure to be back here again today after a really wonderful day yesterday and great concert. So let's just get right into it. Philip, and you are going to represent a talk by you and Paulo Maria Rodriguez about the plan to Rumori.
Okay, thanks. Good morning, everyone. My name is Philip Lopes. Paulo stayed in Portugal. He's not sick. He just couldn't come. And we'll be talking about Planta Rumori, which is a project that we started last year. It's the first report because it's in its early stages. And Planta Rumori belongs to a larger project called Experimus. And Experimus itself is a project that is about musical experimentation in the Portuguese context in Portugal. So this Experimus project has several branches of study, and performance is one of them, and Planta Rumori belongs to this branch of the Experimus project. And basically, with Planta Rumori, me and Paulo are trying to study ways to do music with plants, in a experimental music with plants, let's say. So a little bit of background. In 2016, I was the head of education at a jazz orchestra in Porto, and I decided on that year to do music with plants. So I would bring plants to schools, to nursing homes, to the different communities that we were working with, and we would just do jam sessions with the plants. So playing music for the plants, looking at the form of the plants and mimicking their form, mimicking their behavior, smelling, recording sounds, very freely work, but always with plants around us. So we did a bunch of concerts. This was a tribute to Sir David Attenborough. So we spent the year doing a lot of different work with plants all around us. And for me, it was really inspiring by the end of the year to do this. It got me sparkling a lot of ideas, and I really wanted to develop further the idea of having plants, music, and technologies and sensors all around us to do music. And it's actually something that sticks. It's sticking to my my composition, my performance, and these are all other works that I've been doing in the nature with plants, with music, also involving the body within the nature. Yeah, so it's something that I like, and I've been concerned. Paulo is that guy there playing the piano. Is also very much related to or interested in making music with nature, with birds and flowers. He calls it tuning people, birds, and flowers. That's his way to put things. So he has a lot of work with the communities, with schools, with musicians, with non-musicians, and he's also done a lot of different work within this context. So me and him, collectively or individually, have been involved in nature and plants. So Planta Rumori was a consequence, a natural consequence for us to develop further these experiences that we've been doing recently, and that sparked a lot of interest and ideas. So our main goals is one of them is to create sonic worlds emerging from a symbiotic relationship with plants, humans, and digital interfaces. Another one is the performance, and probably the performance is the most important aspect of this, is at the performance level that we will validate the things that we are trying, that we are developing. I think it's at a performance level that we can get the knowledge that we are seeking. I think it's at the performance level that what is most interesting happens, and what's most interesting to realize and to discuss. And of course, to nurture a fruitful relationship between humans, plants, and nature. And of course, this is a good time in our collective history to do these kind of things, I guess. The challenge, obviously, is to deal with soundscapes that are unknown to human ears. The term soundscape is also a concept that has been living among me and Paolo in many different ways. It's not just about the sounds that are around us, but we see a soundscape as a potentiality to make music, to make sound. So it actually involves the sounds that are around us, but it also encompasses the people, the objects, the instruments, everything that has the potential to do sound. We call it soundscape. Of course, plants now belong. We're bringing plants to this soundscape, but they are special, they are particular, and that's what we are trying to study and to embrace in this collective soundscape. Making music with plants is not something new, of course. It dates back to Vivaldi, Four Seasons. It didn't use any sensors, but it was inspired by nature, obviously. And this is something that has been going on. Tchaikovsky, the Beatles, Stevie Wonder. Of course, when you get to the 20th century, then you get analog technologies. You can measure things on the plants, and with computers, this expands even further. So you get people making music for plants, you get people collecting data from plants, you get people like Mylis, which I love to work. She's also a very interesting person, but she has a very a beautiful project with plants, and using sensors and digital technologies is something that is not that expensive and not that hard to learn. So there are a lot of works you can find online relating music, digital technologies, and plants. One of the most important works within this context is the work The Interactive Plant Growing by Christina Sommer and Laura Mignot. I think that's the right way to say it. So in 1992, they put a plant, and people would touch the plant, and when they touch the plant, they would see an artificial plant growing on the screen. Now, the important aspect of this work, I believe, is not so much the technology that is involved in sensing the touch, but it's important to realize that plants are sensitive. We already know that plants are living beings, but it's completely different to touch a plant and see something happening. It really says to you, and you can touch it, you're seeing it, that the plant is a living being. It's not a MIDI controller or something, it's not a button. It senses things. So all the plants that are around us probably feel things and feel our presence and feel when we are with them. And I guess this is quite poetic in that sense. It shows that plants feel us. yeah, it's an important work within this realm. In the paper, we talk about this work, and just recently, Christina Summer, Laura, and Weil, I don't remember the first name, they wrote an article called "The Art of Human to Plant Interaction," and they describe a whole range of possibilities to use sensors with plants. So I'm not going to go into that. You can find that on the paper, and you can find related works that use these different techniques to sense plants. The thing is that we were analyzing these all diverse and expanded artworks that relate music and plants. And we kind of divided things into two main trends. You got works that use plants as listeners or as recipients, and you got works that use plants as performers and producers. When I say plants as listeners and recipients, it's mostly people making music for plants or putting music to plants to see if they grow better, if they grow faster, things like that. We are not really interested in this trend of listeners and recipients. We are more interested in the plants as performers. And within this branch of plants as performers and producers, we believe there are two main trends or two main branches. One of them is sonification. So you put sensors in the plant and then you sonify that data, biodata to sound. You do the mapping that you feel is the right mapping, but you pick up on this data and transform it to sound. That's sonification. And the other one is using plants as an interface. Using plants, so Planta Rumori picks up on these two branches, on these two ideas, but we are concerned with the aspect of plants used as an interface. The thing is that it's different, and Christina somewhere in their work really proved that. Using plant as an interface should be different than using a MIDI controller, a plastic MIDI controller. There's a difference there. This is a living thing. It's not a plastic thing that we're just pushing. And this is something that we've been worrying about and we've been talking about. I'll go into this in detail later. But you are using plants as an interface, but we are a little bit concerned with that idea. Now, I'll read this. Our proposal is intrinsically artistic, which means we want to create the possibility of communication between humans, plants, by developing sounds that can relate to each other in a manner that is simultaneously musical, as we humans understand it, and functional or organic, as we tend to perceive the natural sounds that surround us. So this sentence really frames our work. So we're working in the realm of possibilities. We are not trying to uncover any hidden truth or any hidden music that plants do that we're going to discover. It's not about that. Our project is poetic. That's why it happens at a performance level. And I guess our research is actually about to create this possibility of communication. It's not to find anything that is hidden in the world. Yeah, so how are we doing this? Our approach relies on two aspects. One of them is what we are using, and then what the strategies that we are thinking and employing in the performance itself. And the other one is the seed, which is a cluster of sensors that will be put or installed in a greenhouse or something alike. So for the performances, we are using, we have these interfaces, so they are commercially available, but we are developing our own with Arduinos and technologies alike. So Spiker Box is one of them. The MIDI Sprout, now it has another name. They came up with an upgrade to this. Makey and data machines, but data machines are more on the actuator side of things, of course. But with this, we're also using acoustic instruments and conventional MIDI controllers and sound synthesis. This is just part of the things that we are using in the performance itself. And the main idea is to use things with which we can get a real-time response. So plants usually don't, their pace of living is very different from our own, the way they manifest themselves. That's why I have the seed. But with this technology, you want to get ways to get answers more or less in real time. So that's why we don't use just these ones, but we also use acoustical sources, instruments, and conventional MIDI controllers and these kind of things. So for the seed, as I was explaining, the plants manifest themselves in a very different time, in a very different pace of time. And of course, when we talk about time, we talk about rhythm to a certain extent. Rhythm is not just the beat, it's much more than that. And we are trying to bring that aspect of rhythmic feeling of time to the performance itself. So that's why we thought it was important to have a seed. And this seed is a collection of sensors which will gather and record data from a specific natural environment over time. And it basically has moisture sensors, different sensors. They are all connected to Raspberry Pi. And yeah, and the sensors then talk to the Raspberry using Python, Python OSC, OSC to Node.js, Node.js to sockets to a public web page that uses this. So the seed is supposed to be something that will collect data to use in the performances, but it's something that we want to somehow be able to get responses in real time in order to be able to include the audience within the performance itself. This is where it is at the moment. It's temporary and it's a work in progress. I'll just show it to you. Yes, so this is the plant of Rumori. These are the readings of the sensors, temperature, air humidity, indoor air quality, sound level. This one died. All right. Yes, all right. This was an imagination exercise. Yeah, so this is the thing. You got here the temperature, air humidity, indoor air quality, sound level, the pressure. This sensor died one day before. I hope it didn't die. It just stopped functioning. But I wasn't able to fix it, so it's fixed on this value. And these are the moisture values. This one is thirsty, actually. Below 20,000 means they are thirsty. And this is my office in my university. And I guess this also died because yesterday at night I went there and it was daylight, and that's not correct. So probably something happened here. And this is a thermal image. You get this thermal camera and it's looking at a specific leaf. And thermal imaging is something that botanists and biologists do to measure things in plants. So you can download a JSON file with all this collected data and the technical specifications. But as I said, this is temporary. I'm still working on this. I just put it online to show you, but it's a work in progress. These are one of the things that we want to develop further. If the audience has laptops or smartphones, if you can go to the future address, not this one, then maybe they can join us playing sounds. The size of the circles are mirroring the specific sensor itself, and it's basically just pitch shifting a sample. It's very basic, but it's just the first experiment. Yeah. So the idea is then when we are performing with the other sensors, with a lot of plants, we have the audience surrounding us and we have speakers surrounding us. And what we want to do is to enable or bring the audience, also to the performance with something like this. But as I said, we are trying out my mouse here. Okay. So far we have done one concert. We didn't have the seed at that time. And we were just trying out all the things that we had for the project and making music. And from this performance, two things are important or were important to maintain. One of them is that we felt the need to use strategies to make music that are not so much idiosyncratic of the plant. So we used a preform and we used drones. So it felt like, okay, we're doing things that we could use without plants. So, okay, let's do today like this, but let's think about this better for the next concert. And that other aspect, which is related to the thing that I was talking about earlier, the interface, is that we were touching the plants, but at some point it felt strange. You know, we brought these plants from Aveiro to Vila Real. We connect things, we nurture them, put water, and then we are touching the plants like it was a mug or anything else, and that felt strange. And the way to approach plants as an interface really needs to be thought for us. So I don't have any answer for now, but this is definitely something that we felt we needed to address in the future. So the final thought is that, as I said earlier, we are not trying to uncover any hidden truth about the plants. We're just trying to create a context that is poetic, and it will help us, or it makes us believe that we are making music with plants, me and as performers, but also the audience. And I guess the main point is poetic, and our main goal is actually to create this illusion of bounding between humans, music, and plants. Yeah, so that's it. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was a great way to start the morning, reminding ourselves what time scales actually are. Are there any immediate questions? No? Well, I have a comment. I think this thing about the understanding of different time scales is super important, and also the complexity of an interface that we, maybe we can appreciate but don't understand. So that not necessarily a comment, but also on the performative aspect of that the plants you are filming in your office are constantly performing this role of being a fixed space or fixed space to go online, which I think has an interesting performative aspect too.
Yeah, the idea is to pick up on the seed and then put it in a greenhouse in a more friendly environment, natural environment, and actually then to be able to replicate this thing to other places. But at the moment it's in my office because it crashes sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting talk. I was also reminded of the work of Til Boverman, who's been doing several projects going into nature and performing music, but also interfacing with plants. So maybe that's another artist to check out, see what he's doing.
Yeah, I need to write that down.
Yeah,
I have a bunch of them, but it's always coming up new.
Yeah,
it's a thing, I guess. It belongs to what's happening in recent years with climate change, and there are lots of projects involving nature and plants, and it's a good thing.
Hi, I have a reference for you, which I think is important historically. The guy's name was Cleve Baxter.
Yeah.
Have you heard about him?
Yeah,
He
the
was employed by
secret
the
life of plants.
FBI to interpret polygraph readouts.
Yes.
And he started connecting a geranium, I believe, to
Mhm.
a polygraph machine and burning leaves with a cigarette lighter and progressing to thinking about harming the plant and getting a response from the polygraph
Mhm.
and then doing it remotely, so that the geranium connected to the machine is in the office, he's in his house, thinking about harming the plant
Yeah.
and getting a readout. And his ambition was to put a geranium into orbit with NASA, but by that, and then conduct a similar kind of thought
Mhm.
through thought. But he was written off as a crank by then, and that never happens. But I think in terms of the history of plant communication and sensors, he's
Mhm.
quite significant.
Yeah, I mean, this experiment is important. As you said, it was kind of squashed by people that want numbers. And I mean, it's hard to say if he was right or wrong, if that was true or not. But I think for us, that's not the case. We just like that possibility of being truth. And we work in the realm of possibilities. And actually, I didn't, I put these slides out. I'm not going to talk about this. I'm not going to have time, but it happened. This book is also very interesting. It's written by Stefano Mancuso and Alessandra Viola, and they are both biologists and botanists. I don't know if that's the name in English, botanists. And they address plants not as Steve Baxton or Clive Baxton actually, but they talk about plants talking to each other, about they have they send nutrients to their offsprings, not the other ones around them. The seed as the brain of the plant, the way they talk, the way they smell, the way, I mean, they make a lot of reference as humans, but they make this claim evident that plants are sensitive beings, just like us. It's a very inspiring book to read about plants if you want to do that. Yeah.
Hi.
Ah, hi.
Hi. I just have another reference that you might check out if you don't know about it. It's called the Nanolab at EBA and in Rio.
Nanolab.
Yes,
Okay.
at EBA University in Rio. They
Mhm.
have done quite a bit of work on.
Guto Nóbrega.
Hmm?
In Brazil, you said?
Yes.
Guto Nóbrega, and
yeah, it might be.
yeah. Yeah, this robotic, a lot of robots with plants.
Yeah, I had a little contact with them in 2013, but I haven't heard.
Yeah, I think it's Guto Nóbrega is also
Yep.
quite inspiring. Yes, thanks.
Great, thank you, Philip.
Thank you
Thank
all
you very
for
much.
having me.
Yeah. And now it's time to welcome Helena Moreno. And online is Rui Peña. And Rui couldn't be here today, but he is very much with us somewhere in the cloud. Embodied Alien. Nobody, No Body is the title of this performance paper. And while we set up and get contact, maybe take the opportunity to Philip has no more sound.
It's working? Okay. Good morning. I think something's not working here. It's asking me which device to plug in. Okay. All right. Okay. Good morning. Well, nothing's showing there. Okay, thank you. It was just bad contact, I guess. Yeah. Good morning. I'm presenting this paper on behalf of Rui also, who's, I think, online, I hope.
Yes.
Okay. This is part of a project, an exploratory project actually, that was funded by the EA Grants Portugal, and which involves 3 institutions: Maia University, University of Aveiro, ESMAI, where Rui works, it's belongs to the Porto Polytechnic, and NTNU, here with colleagues Vin Branset and Turnhagen. And this is actually a work we developed towards presenting at Art of Feedback conference in Canterbury, and so we're doing a slightly different version here. Unfortunately, there won't be a performance because this would depend on Rui being here. Since he's not here, we'll try to show a couple of videos at the end of this talk so that you get an idea of what we've been doing. So basically, this is about feedback. It's a presentation about feedback. And the way we approached it was to explore machinic feedback as a means of cyclic co-creation in order to understand procedures of interaction, adaptation, and expressivity in the context of technologically mediated performance. And so the ongoing project, which we hope to keep up in the next months, years, focused on cross-adaptive modulations, artificial intelligence, and their contribution towards the expansion of human actions on stage. So we had 3 topics that we intended to approach on the general topic of human response to machine manipulation, and addressing 3 layers of feedback. So far, we've only worked on the first 2, which is amplifying the resonances with piano with transducers, and also mediate improvisation through control feedback. We intend to work on the 3rd strand later, but so far we haven't gotten much up to it. So the general idea is that we see the technology as a sort of an alien partner, which manifests itself through the acoustical instrument equipped with transducers. And so the resonances of the piano body become the common playground for this machine-human encounter. And we developed 2 case studies, and Rui will explain a little bit about that. Rui, are you there?
Yes. Hi. First of all, very sorry for not being there for the performance. So what we have on screen is, can you listen to me?
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah.
So what you had on screen, but you will shortly have again, is a very simple system, which actually consists on the soundboard of the grand piano being both connected to a contact microphone. And actually, I noticed you put myself on screen. Hi, it's nice to see you. But if you could actually put the presentation back, because I'm referring to what the presentation shows.
Well, we all got to see Rui.
Yes. Sorry
and his
about
beautiful piano. And
yes.
Okay. Yeah, it's on.
Thanks. Okay. Thank you. So this is actually a very simple setup, as you can see. We have the piano soundboard connected to both a piezo and a transducer, and that makes this is a very common setup, and it makes us able to use the soundboard of the piano as both a microphone and a transducer that we can do some DSP on. With this very simple setup, we took 2 approaches so far. Can you move to the next one, please, Elena?
Well, I have a black screen here. Okay.
Okay.
No, wait. My computer screen
Move
is black.
to-
I'm trying to.
Yes.
Well, this is the one we have, and then this is another. The next is the other one, right?
It's yes,
Yeah.
that was appeared briefly on screen.
Oh,
So
good.
your good host Eyvind developed first of all a plugin. So I'm going to explain and then you can show the videos. Yeah,
Okay.
developed a plugin that actually he can talk better about it if you're interested, but actually enables enables the whole system to know what to predict, what kind of influence the sound being produced by the DSP, by all of the effects, will have in the transducer piezo system. And we can actually subtract that from the signal. So this allows us to do some feedback cancellation, if you will, that enables us to process the system and turn the whole system into a more controllable environment that you can use to process the sound of the piano and process all of the sounds being played on the piano. And Elena will shortly show you a video of herself and Bruno Pereira interacting with this system, and even controlling the effects being applied on the piano. And the second approach we took, and that's actually the one me and Elena were going to present there, and it's the one we're currently working on, consists basically on, and this is the one we're going to try to apply machine learning into it. So this basically for now consists on a very simple system that takes the input from the piezo speaker, analyzes that input, and for now I'm doing it manually. So what I do is I see the analysis of what of the sound, and I select some very specific moments that I think will be interesting to explore. And then I apply very simple filters on top of that to actually control the development of the feedback, interacting with what Elena is doing. This is actually a very simple system that Elena is going to show you on the second video. The goal of being it very simple is that it's actually a system that will be quite easy to implement in terms of a machine learning approach. And the whole idea is that we will teach the machine how to do that, how to interact with the piano by controlling the feedback. And the way we're going to teach the machine is by actually playing it. So we have been playing it together. We will play more. And all the data of these concerts and rehearsals is being recorded. So then we can use that data within a very simple system to teach the machine. Of course, the machine will have probably an erratic behavior. You know, the one thing we need to know about machines thinking is that they will think differently, right? And so we're very looking forward into that stage, into seeing how, by teaching the machine with this very simple mechanism, we can actually listen and interact with it in an interesting way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Roy. I'll just add some performative issues because I am the pianist. And so for a performer of an acoustic instrument relating to electronic contents, be live electronics or pre-recorded context, involves specific challenges. And thus we've been doing quite a bit of studio work in order to address that problem, because the corporality of the electronic sounds functions as an alien sound for a performer. That's the bottom line, especially if you compare with acoustic properties and the affordances of musical instruments and their historical and symbolic background. And so there's a special ethics of listening, I think, when improvising or engaging with live electronic contents, or reacting even to yourself being mediated through feedback or other means. And that's something that several researchers have pointed out. And I feel that the issue is not so bipolar these days. For instance, Simon Emerson in 2000, he was evaluating extant tendencies in music produced by and through technology. He identified two main streams. He labels one as one that persists on representing humanity, I'm quoting, and the other one conveys, and I'm quoting again, a clear imprint of the human will rather than the human presence. However, in a more recent publication from 2018, he acknowledges that there is a broader and polystylistic taxonomy of forms at the core of the live interfaces, which demonstrates that the current developments really afford a wide range of approaches. Before I show the videos, just some ideas that I noted down from my experience as a performer. Working with an instrument that has such a defined timbre and very defined heights, and working that in a context of feedback can actually become overbearing or unnatural at some point. And there's always constraints when I work with feedback, which require constant adaptation and very specific strategies. For instance, feedback does mimic and extend the piano sounds. But from the pianist's point of view, this connection can range from recognizable identification of some contents and materials, but to totally alien content. And so at this far of the scope, at this far end of the scope, the issue of selecting improvised contents becomes more critical, as they simply do not mingle or do not function well with that type of contents that feedback provides. So one of the things that I found is that I feel very comfortable using extended techniques, what Luc Weiss calls the improper affordances of the piano. And I feel that they can somehow bridge the divide between the sound quality or the territorialization of the piano sound that is operated, and combine them more efficiently with digitally generated sounds. And so I end up focusing more on a soundscape rather than on specific techniques, or even adopting a virtuosistic discourse and techniques, because they simply do not work. So I'll finish by showing a little bit of two performances. I don't think we'll have time to see them both, but maybe 2 minutes of each. There's something here. Okay, it's going back to life. This one was filmed in Trondheim last year. I don't think the sound is working. Okay, so what do I do? Just check if the sound is on. Yeah, it's on. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Okay, I don't think we have much time, so maybe a couple of minutes more. Or... Yeah, okay, so maybe you can see a little bit of the other one performance. This was filmed with a cell phone, so the sound quality might not be the best, but
It's actually a bootleg recording.
yeah. We were not told about it until it was done. Well, at this point, Nick Collins said where to stop, so we did.
Well, at this point,
Yeah.
Nick Collins.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Helena and Rui. It was very interesting. Do you have any questions? Yes?
Can we switch back to Rui here, maybe? Or if it's okay, I mean.
Any other questions?
Yeah. Sorry. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you very much for a great talk. I'm here in the back. Here. Hi. I had a question, or first a question and then a comment. So the question there also in the last one we saw, the sound, all the sounds coming from the piano, right inside of the piano. Was this correct? Yeah.
Maybe Rui can explain that better in technical terms. Yeah.
Yes, they were coming from the transducer placed on the soundboard of the piano. The sound of the video actually was recorded with a cell phone, so it's not a proper recording. Yeah,
Sure.
all the sounds came from the sound.
So then my follow-up question or comment, and this is more of a reflection, I guess, on looking at the two different performances. Since you have this is shared performance in a way, but in the first one, you have both of the performers are inside of the instrument, also physically engaged with the instrument, while in the second one, then it's mainly you being physically connected to the instrument as such, while the other person is sitting separate from the physical generation. I'm not sure if you reflected anything on kind of the physicality of the sound and while we were performing this.
Yeah, well, as a performer, I don't really see much of a difference. To a certain point, visual communication is important, but I tend to listen a lot more than I look at, because I guess in the first performance was important to have that physical connection with the singer, also because what he was doing was very gestural. But I can engage with sound that has no gestural qualities per se. I suppose most performers would do that. In this context, it's actually easier if it's live electronics, because if it's pre-recorded, you don't get that experience, and then it's totally alien what you hear and what you do. So this is
well.
Yeah.
In my case, I completely get the question, especially coming from the ICLI community, which is my role in that stage was actually quite the opposite of what you expect from the live interfaces community. But that's mainly because I was there behind the piano for very practical reasons. We didn't have a large room. The piano was very small. In order for me to listen to the sounds of the piano, I had to be there. But the whole point in this specific performance, the second, is I am the machine in a way. So I shouldn't actually be on stage, and our goal is for my role there to be replaced by the machine in a way. So yes, it was not. I'm not a performer in that sense. Of course, I am performing, but the whole idea is for the audience to ignore me, really.
Which is interesting, I guess, because for a performer, that would not be the ideal setup, as a matter of fact. But I feel as a performer that there are some things that we engage naturally with. Sound is one of them, and gesture is the other one. So, but they can be separate to some extent, yeah.
To follow up on that, but also the idea of the alienation of the acoustic musician. There's two contemporary pianists that have written quite a bit about that. Both have done a PhD. Xenia Pestova has written quite a bit about that, as well as Sebastian Berbeck.
Okay.
And the composer Hans Tutschku from Harvard also writes quite extensively about that and how he actually uses it as part of his compositional process, but also how to do live electronics in a live context, but then it's not towards improvisation, but more through composed music, which is a slightly different context. But you do see a lot of the same concepts, ideas, problems, and strategies of what you two have discussed in the talk. So it would be definitely relevant to check that out.
Okay, I'll write it down afterward.
Hi there. I just had a quick question. Is the live electronics completely reactionary to what you're playing, or are you also being steered by the live electronics?
You work with the feedback, right, Roy?
Yes. This is part of another project we also had going together with the Experimus concert. Actually, the same concert Philippe showed, we also used a similar instrument to this one. So all of the sounds that I have to work with are sounds produced by the piano. or sounds of the electronics as they are amplified by the piano. So I start with a blank state every single time. But then, of course, I'm able to get material that Elena had played before. So in a sense, she is interacting with herself, mediated by the electronic system.
Hi, beautiful presentation. I'm Kristen Norderval, and really, I have a soft spot in my heart for transducers on pianos, having done projects with 8 pianos with transducers playing their own sounds.
Yeah.
I was curious from you as a pianist, are you able to kind of predict what certain kinds of gestures, what will happen with the feedback, or is that changing? Maybe this is kind of a continuation of the last question.
Well, predicting, no, because I never know what Rui is going to do.
Okay.
Not really. So, but that's very good, because I think I would get bored if I could predict
well,
what was going on. So I think the challenge of not knowing exactly, and also this thing about, okay, it's me, but it's not me anymore.
That was my second question.
Yeah,
How do you
it's
feel
my
about the
ali-
instrument? Are
it's
you
my
feeling
alien.
like it's an add-on to the instrument, or are you feeling like it's a completely new instrument, or something
No,
in
I think
between?
it's alien. It's an alien, and I have to relate. We have to, like, I mean, if you go to a foreign country, you don't understand the language, you somehow have to try to communicate. It's. I think it's the same type of experience, but it's very challenging, and it's for me it's freeing, because I'm a pianist. Bred on Chopin, Chopin etudes and Beethoven sonatas. So this is a totally different type of experience, and it's engaging, and it's very creative. I think it's very good. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Helena.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Rui. Now I welcome Bernd Isaac Werster to the stage, prepping for a continuation about instruments, but this case, instrument design using machine learning and artificial intelligence.
Right. Hello, my name is Bernd Cuesta. I'm here to present my ongoing project, which I've called Instrument Design Using Machine Learning and Artificial Intelligence. Really catchy title there. So, anyway, I've been performing with a variety of digital musical instruments for about the last 10 years now. And most of them are kind of hybrid instruments, extending either my own guitar or traditional instruments performed by other musicians. And in either case, I've often been missing the kind of tactile feel and the haptic response, and what I feel is kind of like an inherent resistance in these acoustic instruments when I'm performing on the digital counterpart. And I also find that these are properties that are important creative catalyzers, greatly affecting both the expressive capacity and the interaction between the instrument and the performer. So I'm searching for some kind of resistance and some kind of dynamic response or feedback, which can lead to new musical ideas or new ways of expressing them. And in a way, I'm also searching for contact or a way of connecting with my instruments, where a musical performance on an instrument can be more communication between two equal subjects, as opposed to a more classical view of a performer which is controlling or playing the instrument. And instead of kind of trying to mimic the properties of the acoustic instruments in this project, I want to focus on the strengths of the digital technology. So that's why I want to explore using different techniques from the fields of machine learning and artificial intelligence. And I've started to explore different modes of instrumental response and resistance that I feel could be perhaps more idiomatic to the digital domain. So in this project, I've started to explore and develop new personal strategies for digital instrument design based on my own artistic expression and experience. And these strategies will be used to both expand my existing instruments and to make new responsive and somewhat autonomous instruments. So so far, I see two sort of main directions that I've been wanting to explore. First one, adaptive instruments. So I've started exploring music information retrieval techniques combined with machine learning techniques in order to create adaptive instruments. The first one you can experience tomorrow. I'm performing at last, actually. So I made a new hybrid guitar computer instrument. It's sort of based on previous iterations of my hybrid instruments, but set up to be in a more adaptive manner. So you can listen to that tomorrow. And this design is also greatly based on my experience from my participation in the artistic research project, Cross-Adaptive Processing as Musical Intervention, led by Øyvind Brandtzæg and involved several other people in this room. The second direction is more related to the idea of autonomy and artificial intelligence, or perhaps you could think of it as an artificial artistic identity. So I want to explore instrument designs with the form of personality, which can also evolve over time. And I always think of instrument design as a cyclic process. And this figure, some of you might have seen before. It's one we've been using in the community in Trondheim a lot, where each round around the circle is another evolution. And it's also important to remember to kind of complete all the steps around there, to not just get stuck in either just performing or just programming. So I use this as a conceptual tool for myself a lot. And it's not only the instruments that are changing and evolving in this way, because I'm also learning and adapting at the same time. So I'm evolving together with my instruments in a sort of symbiosis. And that's maybe one of the most interesting aspects, I think, of this evolving instrument idea. It's also kind of more personal. So how will I, as a performer, be affected by this, and how will I change and evolve over time? Which also relates to then how we perceive the machine and its musical outputs. And one of the big questions when making something like this is, of course, how to make the computer produce something that is musically meaningful, or which we at least can interpret as some kind of musical intent. So in my early experiments, even before starting with this project, I started just exploring more kind of generative algorithms. And I found that even just a simple smooth random walk produced a lot of, at least to me, meaningful musical ideas and initiatives. So even though it's very basic, just a random impulse, it did already give me kind of a sense of agency and autonomy from the machine, which directly affected my playing and encouraged new musical responses. So I find that to be already very inspiring. So I'm going to play a short excerpt of that so you get a sense of what I'm talking about. So this is a random smooth walk, just used to control the start and end points and the playback speed of looper device. So hopefully there should be sound now. So, and as I mentioned, it's not only just me playing alone. I actually mostly work in collaborative projects, and one of the projects that's also involved in this project is my duo with Sashen, who's a Japanese vocalist and dancer who's finishing her master at the Norwegian Academy of Music. We've been working together for a while, doing live sound manipulation of her voice. So she's only doing acoustic voice, and I'm only doing electronics. But in November last year, we went to Vancouver for a project with Dr. Bob Pritchard at UBC, and he has made this very nice suit called RUBS, Responsive User Body Suit. I'm not going to talk about that because it's not so directly related to this talk, but it's basically a sensor suit where they have capacitive touch strip. So it enables Sashen to also participate in the sound manipulation of her voice. But in our duo, we've been working a lot with our communication and time, and conceptually we have thought about when we're using delays and looping as a way of interacting with our past selves. And in addition to using looping and delays, we also implemented the setup for live recording of voice samples where we build up a sound corpus during the course of an improvisation. So sounds are recorded throughout the whole improvisation, and which means we can go back in time. For this project with in Vancouver, which we called Touch the Voice, we wanted to explore this concept of time and past self even further. So we began building a studio recorded corpus of acoustic vocal improvisation. And this is where the machine learning thing come in. So we experimented with various segmentation and classification techniques for this corpus, and also a system where you can sample her voice in real time and use that to pick out and play back similar voice samples. So this is a pretty rough basic system so far, but we've started exploring more techniques to refine this instrument, and also started looking at different playback techniques like corpus-based concatenative synthesis. So it's quite early days for this project so far. One of the main things that I want to look at in the future that I've already started to have a look at is reinforcement learning, which I think will be the direction to go for creating evolving autonomous instruments. I've also briefly had a look at the audio oracle algorithm, which has some very interesting concepts when it comes to structuring audio to give musical sense. And on the next slide, I have a list of some artistic projects and research that I've already looked into. But since it's a curriculum talk, I want feedback. So please give me names and ideas for other relevant projects and research to have a look at. So yeah, so far this is kind of like see it as a preliminary project. It's only a 1-year project in a 20% position, which started in September last year. But I hope that it will eventually lead to a full-blown artistic PhD project. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernd. Right. Question in the back.
Thank you for a great presentation. I was kind of wondering, in the beginning of the presentation, you were mentioning that you're kind of looking for resistance. And I was in a lot of machine learning and artificial intelligence project that I've seen, very often it's kind of structured in a way that the more the artificial intelligence learns about like the bigger the corpus that is fed to it, the more the better it gets in kind of reproducing similar similar things. A lot of these kind of algorithms seem to be very good at mimicking. I was kind of wondering if you are thinking about strategies to have these kind of systems use them in a way that they can provide surprise or can sort of push you in different musical directions instead of getting better at knowing what you do and adapting to you, but maybe confronting you instead.
Yeah. So there's I have two comments on that. The first one is sort of like that's also why I played this random smooth walk, because I think like just inserting some pieces of randomness can also be an interesting way of getting surprised. And I've also been sort of collaborating or at least talking a lot to. There's a project at the Norwegian Academy of Music, which is called Goodbye Intuition, with Ivar Grydland and Morten Kvenhild, Sissel Andresen, and a few. Maybe it's listed here somewhere. No, it's not listed there. And where they kind of, that's sort of their goal, that they want to be surprised. So it's something that I've been thinking a lot about to add the element of surprise, and that's why I want to have this evolving AI, so that it's not something that stays constant and gets perfected into like a the perfect ghost of me. But yeah, I mean, it's I want to both the computer and me to change over time.
Any other questions? I have a comment, but on the sort of the three presentations this morning, which I think is a really fascinating continuation. This thing about having cross-species communication and different types of literacy, which I think has been sort of the key elements for me to think about with these. That there's it's a lot about fluidity or the randomness and the lack of that. But no, it makes me very happy. I'm very happy about these three together as well. That makes a lot of sense. Are you sure there are no more questions right now before coffee? Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Hi. The last speaker talked about the improper affordance of the piano. Might this be a way for you to kind of engineer some surprise, thinking about the improper affordance of machine learning? I mean, and what could that be?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, and I think as opposed to most of the other applications of machine learning, where it's about perfecting a goal, or to recognize dogs instead of cats 99% of the time. The nice thing about making art is that we're welcoming fault and glitches and all these things. It's I mean, the main goal is more to create something new. So in what way that is created, it's of less important than to have the perfect algorithm, I think. But yeah, it's an interesting thought to explore.
Yes, thank you very much for this very interesting talk. I think with the last duo you presented, it opens up a completely hybrid of world between body and reinforcement you want to approach. So I wonder if you were thinking about the role of the body of the dancer and singer, if she's more like a controller, or does the body has also another function, or how you see her role as a dancer, but also as a vocalist?
Yeah, so what was really interesting about this, adding in this suit and adding in the body. So before, when it was just vocals and me doing processing, it felt like a very kind of tightly connected and very short feedback loop of communication, of musical communication. And then, adding in this suit sort of felt like now we had a multisensory communication instead. So I was now not only just improvising based on the sound of her voice, but based on her movement. Like, so her movement had both direct actions, she could start a loop or whatever, but also her gestures had musical significance to me, so made me respond in different ways, and also made me respond physically. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question
Yeah,
now,
the
but
the question is also if, I mean, it's also the whole question about mapping strategies.
Yeah.
So of meaningfulness of mapping strategies. What is she doing? What does it mean if she moves? Can we recognize something? Is this important or not? Can we recognize a connection between her movement and sound, or is it randomly, or is there no perceived meaning? Or, I mean, you do not have to answer, but it's just a whole area of questions around that. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, so we're basically able to control some of the same processing parameters. So these strips would be kind of like faders, right? So she could, for instance, control the length of the loop by moving her arm like this, which I could also control with a button. So feedback from the audience was that there's some sort of sometimes they understand it and sometimes it's confusing, which also find a bit nice. But yeah, it's very kind of functional movement with the suit, but it also adds in non-functional, more musical moves. And one of the next steps for this project is also to include motion capturing, so that this suit felt like all her movements were very kind of inward bound, and but adding in motion, so motion tracking can make it these kind of like outgoing movements also more interesting, and also make it yeah, yeah more musically, hopefully. And I didn't mention it, but we also both been thinking about meaning to include machine learning in the mapping process, or the gesture recognition and stuff like that. So that's also in the future.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. I was thinking in terms of directions. Um, One reference project could be the live algorithms for music project that was happening 10 years ago in London. Maggie King was one of the researchers in that. And then I think, yeah, looking into agent-based systems, which have different ways of exploring different spaces. And there's maybe some other reference work in dance. Mark Downey did some interesting work in with agent-based systems. And then there's also an artist named Sofiane Audrey, who has also developed or implemented a couple of artificial intelligence algorithms in his library Qualia, which have these different ways of implementing agents. So those could be good references to look at.
Yeah, I'll note them down. I'll find you afterwards and note them down. Too much to remember. But speaking of agents, I also been thinking about this GANs, or generative adversarial networks. That's an interesting field to explore, to have competing agents, and have so that the machine can also interact with itself, sort of.
Hi. First of all, thanks. This is just a comment, and also for the early presentations. I mean, this relationship, this iterative process of co-creation with an intelligent system, in your three talks, just reminds me of George Lewis. I don't know. I think I should mention him. And um, also, I think if you really go to that agent exploration, live exploration, um, with and for the agent on stage, I mean, I would definitely recommend the work of Eigenfeld and Simon Fraser, the Meta Creation Lab, and so on. It's just a comment.
Yeah,
I think they're really interesting.
I'll note that. I have read George Lewis, and yeah, it's very inspiring what he's done, of course.
Thank you for all the great questions. And I think this is a really good place to go to coffee. But there's something really interesting about this adding abstraction by adding another level of detection and mapping. And happy to say that after coffee, we continue with interfaces and mapping. So enjoy the coffee break. But first, can we please give another applause to Bernd? Thank you.
See her how she flies.
cross-species communication and instrumental literacy and added levels of abstractions. Let's continue with an interface to an interface to an interface. Ivan?
You hear me? Ta-ta. Okay, so let me first come with a sort of a warning. There will be no groundbreaking new knowledge coming here. I mean, a lot of you will be familiar with these insights, but it relates to the concerts that many of you heard, the concert that many of you heard last night when I was computer controlling the church organ and playing con and Caro piano studies. So some of the reflections done in that context is valid for all sort of interfaces, and I thought it valuable to think about this together with you. So, well, we're heading towards lunch, but not yet. But all interfaces are sort of layered. So when we think about interfacing the computer to an organ, it appears as one thing that we do, but there's always these layers. And when you connect a MIDI keyboard to the computer, it also seems like one step to do, but breaking down into what we want to achieve with this and the technical implementations. And let's say when we interface to a disc clavier, there's the response of each single key and how that all adds up, and then adding on top of that, the thing that we really want to do is interface from here to there, to your minds. So, and an interface is sort of also a border. So we are trying to reach into something that is on the other side of some border, and this might be some harsh delineations between these domains that we try to interface, or it might be a friendly trip. But main thing is that we can think about it as a friendly thing. But then in programming, you also have interfacing between modules, and there's this law in ideally, you would think of these interfaces, these modules, as black boxes. And you can replace one black box with another with the same functionality. And you don't really know, you don't really need to know what's in this black box. But as the law of leaky abstractions says, things go wrong, things leak, sometimes a lot, sometimes a little. And well, this is leaking a lot. And these leaky abstractions tells us that we need to know what's on the other side if we are going to use these interfaces for the purposes that we intended to do, and especially when this is artistic expression. So, and there's also this aspect that an interface does something for us that we didn't have the ability to do without it. So there's some level of automation also involved in this. And Nankaro, who wrote these compositions we heard last night, were deeply into automation, and because his musical concepts were so complex that it was hard to get human performers to do what he wanted. And he used this piano roll pianos, and the piano roll, let's see what happened. Oh, I have a, so, and we can recognize this piano roll also in a modern DAW concept of the piano roll. I'll just see what happens here. Yeah, okay. So that's one of the roles. And one reason for commenting on this is when he was working, implementing his ideas here, he punched holes in paper. And if he did a mistake, he would cover the hole with tape and then keep on punching. And then later on, when we try to scan these rolls, we have plenty of chance for getting an error in the scanning because some of the tape may have fallen off. Maybe it's a transparent tape that actually worked in this setting where there were pneumatic, where there was air passing through these holes, but may not work the same in the optical scanning of this. And it's also interesting in terms of how we work with computers today when we shape our musical statements. So the way I have understood Nancaro's process, he would sketch something down very simply and then start punching it and then figuring out how it would go by hearing this played back, much in the same way as we do when we program a piano roll on the computers today. And then after this, he produced the official score for the piece. So this is an example from one of the scanned piano rolls. This is from study 21X, and you can see there's this one process starting out with very fast, thinning out, and this other process starting very slow and going to extremely fast. So this also brings me into the concept of density here. When we try to do this on an instrument that has latency and has the physical reality of how to control this instrument influence how the music can be done. And Nancaro wanted his music to be very percussive, so he even removed the felt from the piano hammers to make it really punchy. And to play it on a church organ is sort of a bit counterproductive in that sense. But so there is also the aspect of getting things synchronized. Let's see here, just some images of how big a machine these organs are, and the distances between pipes, as we can see, are large. So there's a beautiful spatialization, of course, due to this different placement of the pipes. But in terms of musical precision, it's actually quite, it's something to take into account. So when we, in our modern interfaces, if we have a 128 samples buffer, this is 3 milliseconds latency, and it's the same as standing 1 meter from a person. So, I mean, a lot of us, we think that, well, we have to go lower than 128 samples to be really responsive, but playing together with another person, we have that latency. It's sort of built into a regular communication situation. So it's not that bad. And if we think of the pipes in an organ, some of them might be 10, 20 meters apart, maybe 30 meters in the Nidaros Cathedral that you were in yesterday. So the synchronization between these different pipes has to be done, and it's not as if all of the registrations are happening in the same place. Maybe some notes on registrations. So one note is there, one note is there, one note is there. So actually individual note by note adjustments of latency had to be made in this setting. So, and also retaining to the disc clavier, as those of you who have worked with the disc clavier would know that there's also a lower level of velocity. If you play lower than, say, MIDI velocity 25, 26, nothing will happen. Sort of the hammer will move a little bit, but it makes no sound. And this is also different per key. And since it is velocity, we tend to think of, I mean, at least me, even though I have played a lot with MIDI, I think MIDI velocity is amplitude, but it's really the speed that you move in with the key. And then if you have a low velocity, you have slightly longer latency before the hammer hits the string. And if you're playing really fast passages, this will make a difference. So coming back full circle here, that all of these interfaces that we work with are layered. We have these borders that we cross, and we provide some automation, and we use some of these automation in our productions. And this is also the same when we look at artificial intelligence and those tools that are much more, I mean, the layers are much more buried deep in the structures, so we can't really see what's inside. I mean, we can, but what's inside a deep learning network really does not make much sense to a human reader or viewer. So thinking about this, I think it also makes sense in terms of AI and how we utilize it. And when someone really criticized AI for being the most dangerous thing that would happen to humanity, I mean, it's we who are doing it. Even say immigrant bureaucracy is sort of a machine with its rules that we do these things, and it's humans who do it. So it's yeah, let's just keep that in mind. And also, I mean, these layers can be beautiful things. So there's things to be explored in each of them. Keep in mind that they are leaky. We have to know something about what we're using it for. And that's it.
Well, I'm glad you were able to keep the time because I was consumed and forgot the time. But yeah, very interesting. Yeah, it's also something about refinement, right, of these layers that, of course, it comes from us, but these levels of abstraction that needs refinement. Questions?
Thank you. That was very interesting. Just a comment or reflection on the last part of your talk here about the artificial neural networks, which, in a way, you say that they are very kind of you didn't say removed from the human body, but on the other hand, artificial neural networks are trying to also simulate how our brains actually work. So I mean, a lot of the complexity and the leakiness that we're talking about here in terms from a technological perspective are inherent in, and it's basically how our bodies work, right? And how our brains are working. So do you have any thoughts on kind of that complexity there?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that some of this leakiness and the layers, it's embedded in our nature as well, and maybe dividing it up into fine-grained levels might make for more confusion than insights. But also, I think it's important to remember that neural networks does not work in the same way as the human brain. It's an sort of an idea of, I think, an attempt to model how it works, and remembering that it's not actually a model of human conscience will be useful when we think about it, I think.
Any other questions? Well, I have another comment then, because I read a really beautiful book, which I came across randomly at a free bookshelf once upon a time. And there was a book that was called Neural Networks. It's from the early 80s by a couple of theoretical physicists. And one of the best descriptions that I've sort of kept going, which also comes back to this muddiness, was that they described complex knowledge is full of lumps. And this thing about it was a very early book on how to form neural networks, but they were basically like, that human knowledge is about lumps. It's about this, stickiness. But yeah, cakes are also a very good way, and layers are a very good way of thinking about human consciousness, whatever that is. Yeah. Questions before we move on? No? Keep them for later. Thank you very much, Ivan. Now, while Marie sets up, where we're going to hear her talk about mapping. So, mapping, the question of mapping, which I think is now very relevant now that we've had different iterations of cakes and black boxes and what we do when we do. So I'm very excited to actually get some good tools for understanding also how we. Yesterday there was also some beautiful maps of interfaces and how they work, and I think it's very important that we actually question how and we map or bypass the way we understand what we're doing. I think this thing about sometimes a cake image bypasses certain levels of understanding that's really important, rather than some where we have schematics that can be very complex and just become another layer of abstraction. So I'm very excited.
Untangle this. Hello, does this work? Yes, great. Maybe I to turn this a little bit. Yeah, the title of my paper is Mapping the Question of Mapping. And it's kind of a position paper. I'm sort of halfway, almost halfway, writing a book about mapping. So I'll try to introduce what this will be about. Of course, it's a huge topic, so I'm trying to, converge it in this. So with mapping, I mean going from gesture to output media. So I'm taking the concept of gesture very broad. It could be made by a performer, like this is a gesture. It could be an audience or a visitor, or it could be things in the environment, like the plants we heard at the beginning of this day. And whatever happens in that environment is somehow linked to some things that happen to output media, like video, audio, mechatronics, light, heat, whatever you can think of. And well, there's a lot of discussion, like, well, it's arbitrary, or it's personal, it's impenetrable, what's going on there. And I'm sort of, was interested by how Michel Weisswitz described this in 1999. He was one of the pioneers in building like new musical instruments. And he was saying the algorithm for the translation of sensor data into music control data is a major artistic area. The definition of these relationships is part of the composition of a piece. Here's where one defines the expression field for the performer, which is of great influence on how the piece will be perceived. So he states like, well, this is actually a very interesting artistic field. So, and my reasoning is then, well, if we want to understand this artistic field, we should actually look into it, just like musicologists have been looking into how notes are placed behind each other, which you can also say, well, that's arbitrary, why should we study it? But people are recognizing styles there, and I think similarly, we could find styles of mapping. Music is one context, and there's some ways of thinking about that. One is shaping performative effort. So how can you shape what you have to do to create music? There's also Thor Magnusson his book has been and his work around sonic writing has been referenced already quite a bit on this conference. And he describes it as, well, musical instruments are like objects for explorations of a music theory. I also find that a very interesting way of thinking about these things. in dance, what we often see is like, well, to create like alternative relationships between the body and space, creating different experience of the body. And that's, I think, a very different approach than is happening in music. Like there's a very different reason for exploring these things, yet a lot of similar methods and techniques are used. And then in interactive media art, there might be different reasons for creating interaction. It might be to explore the interaction itself, or it could be something like, well, we want to make this physical phenomenon which we normally can't detect with our senses, make that perceivable. Or it might just be used as a tool to look into other topics. And I think these are very different ways of using interactive technologies as well. So yeah, sort of the importance, like my motivation is like, well, artistic motivations and works are very different, but similar tools, methods and techniques are used. But the technology that we are using is continuously developing. Like hardly everyone now picks up the sensor lab of Stein, which was developed in the 90s, even though it was very powerful. There were a lot of interesting concepts in there. No one is using these anymore. So the question comes like, how do we preserve and communicate these concepts that were embedded in these interfaces so that artists who are starting in the field now can build further upon these concepts rather than reinventing and starting from scratch again. So, and even sort of, if you look at current things or current state of the art, it's very useful if artists using like MaxMSP can talk about the way they map things to people who are working with SuperCollider or C-Sound or Pure Data without having to refer to, well, I use this max object and it goes to this. And then the SuperCollider is like, yeah, well, I don't know. So it's useful to have a common vocabulary to talk about these methods and techniques. Some related work, of course, this is a vast field and I'm probably still missing quite a few. So for musical expression, there was a book in 2006, New Digital Instruments and Control and Interaction Beyond the Keyboard, which has a lot of useful information on sensing and sort of general descriptions for mapping, but mostly stays on the input side. There is a chapter which is talking about generative computer composition, but I feel in that book it's a little bit disconnected from the other chapters. Yeah, on the sort of theoretical, philosophical sonic writing, I found a really interesting resource. If you haven't read it yet, do it. Yeah, several journals have had special issues about this, like Organized Sound, Computer Music Journal. Of course, in the conference proceedings of the ICMC, NIME, and ICLI, of course, there's interesting references. And there's also this, there was a symposium, I think, in 2000 at IRCAM, Trends in Gestural Control of Music. And I found it kind of interesting that there was sort of these overarching sort of around 2000, there was a lot of like interest in sort of looking at the broader picture. Then the NIME started. I was, yeah, sort of very sort of small studies usually, and now maybe it's coming back to look at the broader picture. In interactive art, I found a very interesting book by Katja Kwastek, Aesthetics of Interaction in Digital Art. There's some other books about participative art, practicable from participation to interaction in contemporary art. And there's a slightly older one about information arts. And these last two are mostly describing works and yeah, or collecting essays, whereas the first one is really an overarching study, yeah, bringing different yeah concepts together, like play theory, but also visual art theory about reception of art. Then in dance, I found Suzanne Kozel. She has this very interesting book about performance technologies phenomenology. Scott de la Hunte has written a lot of things about dance and technology, but I'm also keen to get a lot of more suggestions for good references from the dance context. Sonification, like other related work in sonification, there's interesting things happening. Sonification handbook, ICAT. I think in gaming, there's also a lot of, there should be some interesting material to read, but it's not a field I'm very familiar with. So if anyone has suggestions, general HCI, despite I think there are some differences in approach, because in music we often want a lot of effort rather than like no effort or effortless interfaces. But I'm keen to get a good reference or other fields that might be useful. I'm talking really fast because I have too many slides and I want time for questions. So the way I'm now looking at this, apart from looking at literature, is also conducting several case studies and work sessions with artists, where I document specific works of these artists. And in the interviews, I asked them about what their artistic concepts and ideas were that led to the development, how that idea evolved as they were developing, and the different choices that they made along the way. And in these work sessions, I try to do that process over the course for 3 days with a small group of artists. I did the first one in October in The Hague, and I had four artists joining there, and it was really interesting to really go in depth talking about this stuff. So they yeah, all the participants found it really helpful to do this. Then yeah, basically what happens is I do a sort of close analysis of the implementation. I sort of made this very crude diagram, like going from gesture to sensors, electronic circuits, computational model, output media. And then often, of course, what we're interested in is the dotted line, the feedback that you get back, the experience. And as Euven said, there's interfaces between each of these arrows is an interface. But then if we look at the computational model, like one starting point is actually looking at the data, like what does the data look like? Those are like technical terms, but they also depend on the actual gestures that you perform. Then sort of on a first level, there's often translating between ranges. So going from like a MIDI range to a standardized range between 0 and 1. Then you can work with thresholds to trigger something, different states of the modes of the instrument. You can do more advanced future extraction, derived data, combine data streams. You can create like computational behaviors, like a very simple one would be the leaky integrator. But yeah, you can also use machine learning and gesture recognition. And often there's multiple stages of computation. So you might first do some translation between ranges, and then put something into a machine learning algorithm. Then the outcome, you might actually process the data a bit further before you go to the output media. And I think one very important thing that is also affecting also how you choose your sensors sort of the model you choose for output generation. So this has to do with how you represent your music. Like, what is your music about? Like, are you controlling like a synthesis process? So that's very sort of like controlling things in the now, or are you using live sampling and looping? Are you working at the note or the texture level, or even the section level, or something else? And I think there's also a lot of that determines the way you approach the whole question. Is about how you think about your music and music production. And I think that's similar also for other media. You have some idea like what is the model that I'm using, and how can I then control these? So that's where you determine the parameters that you control. And then you can think of like, well, okay, so the input parameters that I have, in what ways will I connect these to these output parameters? And there's different ways. I mean, in the mapping literature, it's all often talked about like one-to-one or one-to-many, or I think actually in most cases it's many-to-many, with different measures of entanglement between them. You can also create presets for specific sets of output parameters and morph between them. You can approach it as just a matrix, and you can have different ways of exploring the mapping space. I have one example. And I just switched the example I was going to show because let's show this one. So this is an instrument from Erfan Abdi called Nootsaas. He participated in the first work session. And I have a short video of this. I'm going to play something very brief.
An interest in the correspondences between how we perceive sound and image, not just as translations from sound to image or vice versa, but rather a means towards composing music. To me, time is the most important element in music composition. So I decided to use motion as a means to represent time. And motion is relative between two types of objects. That's how I started to build very simple interfaces with two types of objects that move in relation to each other. And when they cross one another, sound is being made. In the first sketches for this work, I used mouse and keyboard to interact with the dynamic score. However, dynamic scores. So, while I was looking for ways to capture the movements of my hands, I got to this object where there were 6 sticks attached to each other, and by holding the both end sticks and moving them around, I could manipulate several points in space.
So I'm just gonna stop it there for time. So the documentation that he created for this during the work session was first, it's very sort of like you have a physical controller. He has this geometric model, which is built in processing, and then that is mapped again to sound synthesis. And he created this very nice overview of the different elements on the physical object, then describing how this visual interface was built. And then below here, he's really describing like what is happening at each stage in the mapping. So here there's some range mapping happening, and that's going into this live bow, translated to positions there. Then that goes into finding intersections, and then that is translated to parameters for the sound. So this is, I mean, he also has a graphic designer background, so he made a really nice image of this. I have 1 minute left, I think. So so some observations that I have, the choices that are made are based on artistic, technical, and practical motivations. Experimentation is often very important. It's very cross-disciplinary. It's artistic and engineering, but also within arts, it's between music, dance, media art, all different sorts of art where interaction is used. Also engineering, the software design, digital signal processing, electronics. And even though there's these different disciplines, similar methods are used, but with different aesthetic aims. It's a technogenetic spiral. I think that's also kind of the picture that Bernd was showing. You are changing as you are getting used to your tool, and that sparks of new ideas, and then you change your technology again. So yeah, it's these kinds of mappings are embodiments of artistic concepts that then also allow for exploration of these concepts. This is what I'll be doing. If you're free next weekend, there's still space at Notam in this workshop. And there will be 2 more sessions in the Netherlands at V2 and at Splendor. I'll be working with graphic designers, right? The book should be out in December 2020. So look out for that. Yeah, so for the question part of this, it's a colloquial paper. So suggestions for references. Where does the model break down of this steps that I have? What else should be in a book about mapping? That's sort of my general question. What am I missing? But I should also thank all these people, the Andy Otto, Jeff, Roseanne Flack, Frank, and Jaime. I've been doing interviews with them for the case study. Dan, Solomia, Stelios, and Erfan were in my first work session. Creative Industries Fund is funding a large part of this research. Black has been helping me to travel around Norway. Thanks a lot. You know who you are, Gerrit. And there's more information about the book, including the little donate button for the rest of the funding.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Question in the back.
Thank you. This is great. I'm really looking forward to reading the book. I had a question about what your limitations of mapping are, because there's a lot of kind of the digital thing, and also many of the references you're pointing at. I kind of been thinking about digital mapping, but are you also including other types of mappings in there? I'm thinking about different types of non-digital electronics and also acoustic things in your models.
Yeah, maybe I don't think I'll make much mention of sort of acoustic mappings, because I mean that's completely a different topic. But I think with the like completely analog electronic, I think I will make reference to that. But yeah, to describe, because I think, I mean, you can do a lot of these things also completely in electronics. But I mean, that would sort of stretch too much to actually go in depth about that. But you can still use similar concepts. And yeah, if you look at like early work from like the 60s and 70s, they were completely electronic, and you could describe them in the same way, but just realizing that this was implemented electronically. But it sort of goes, yeah, beyond the scope of what I can handle to really describe it in that way. But I'll make reference of it. That is a possibility.
Thank you for a great talk. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the available tools and technology for mapping. You were speaking about how we can talk about mappings in different softwares, and then there are a lot of people are using, for instance, Ableton Live, which have a very limited feature space for mapping. And yeah, if there any thoughts on the development of tools and technology?
Yeah, so in the case studies, I will mention the tools that the artists have been using. Yeah, actually, in one of the case studies with Rosa and Flack, one interesting part was also that they moved from doing everything with Max MSP or Max for Live and Ableton to Super Collider. So I do write about how what happened in that transition, how that influenced like the work. And I will also talk about some of the most of the now obsolete software from Stein, like the Sensor Lab with Spider and Junction, which is now also not updated anymore. But also from the other side, Lisa, Rosa is still working, but so that, that one is actually still working. But so and otherwise, I'm using. I'm looking at a lot of these toolkits that are made for different programs as also as source material, like the Digital Orchestra Toolbox from ITMIL from McGill University. There's a mapping library for PD as well. I've been looking into that. What kind of tools are in there? I still want to look also at the Yamoma project. Yeah, and then of course, like in Super Collider, I'm looking at different tools that people have made. I was actually part of a project here in Norway called Modality, where we also talked a lot about mapping, but we actually didn't get to sort of make a unified toolkit for that part of the, the project. But we did talk about it a lot. So I'm bringing these in, but then try to describe them as concepts and sort of have like pseudocode or like how you could implement these things. And then what I also want to set up is like a repository where people can contribute examples of how they are then implemented. So I would probably do this in Super Collider then, but then I hope that other people will say like, well, I'm teaching this class, I'm doing my examples in C Sound, so I'll make examples that go with the book for C Sound and I'll upload them so that other people can use them. So that's how I try to tackle it that way.
Hi.
Yeah, that's two microphones. No, that's fine. It's
Please,
fine.
it's okay. Okay, thanks. So first of all, thank you for the presentation. Really interesting references. I wanted to go because the video touched this topic a little bit. I wanted to go to the visual sound relationships and mapping, and it reminded me of an interview to Alva Noto in Barcelona. I think they were talking about you know how to map sound to visuals and vice versa. And we mentioned Kandinsky and this kind of visual relationship, like this sound is clearly a red, this sound is clearly a square, and so on. This kind of immediate relationships. And he said something like, "I don't believe in anything of that. I mean, I believe you can have a visual language, and for that you need to study sound," which was really interesting when I listened to that. And in his performances is pretty much conventional laptop exploration, and then you have these spectrograms and this flickering interesting work. And I would like to know what's your opinion on that. If you go through that to the book, that kind of languages you can have, synesthetic languages you can have.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think that's also kind of a similar translation like problem. So I think some of the methods can be used in that sense. I mean, yeah, if you go from sound to visuals, then often you do some sort of analysis of the sound, which then generates data, which you then map to your output visuals. And I haven't thought of it thus far as sort of an explicit topic for the book. Um, yeah, I think that, I mean, that's one thing. I am sort of, my own background is in sound. So that's sort of my main reference. But that's, I also know that that sort of makes it hard for me to actually address a lot sort of about visual parts, because that's something I'm less familiar with. But I imagine that a lot of what I'm describing could be equally useful for people working with visuals. But it would be nice to be able to reference good books on sort of interactive visual design, if anyone has any. So I can point readers to that. Say, well, if you want to know more about this, then go and read stuff there. Um, and I mean, similarly, I can't sort of cover like the full breadth of sound composition and approaches there, but yeah. So in that sense, on that's as sort of the output side, I want to describe like, well, it's important that you have this model and that you determine like your output parameters, and that is an important aspect. But of course, I can't go into the full, yeah, feel. I mean, that would be 5 other books probably to go in each output medium.
First of all, thank you so much for doing this project. I think it's so important, and I will really look. I'm really looking forward to it. And yeah, so thank you for that. I was wondering, do you plan to have any discussion about the role of the audience? Because I'm often thinking about mapping also from the audience perspective.
Mhm. Yeah, actually, on my way to to here, I started writing down a couple of things about that. And yeah, actually thinking about the role of all the people involved. And yeah, one of them is sort of the presentation context. And yeah, so it is a topic I will address. Yeah, for music performance, that's sort of about how it's perceived, like what the audience understands, what's going on, how that effort is perceived, and also in the case studies, like the musicians I've interviewed, they were also like, yeah, well, the main reason to do this was because I didn't want to look like a laptop musician on stage. I wanted to show the effort in of making music. So that's yeah, quite often was one of the starting points. Like, well, I want to actually, yeah, show that the music is created by my hands or body. And of course, in interactive arts, the audience that these roles are even more important to describe, because there you have well, you have the artist making, but then you have a visitor who might have to do something, but then someone might also be watching that visitor. And what does that mean? And what kind of consequences does that have? Because that might the visitor interacting feel more shy to, well, maybe I'm doing something very weird, and this person I don't know sees that. So yeah, it is something I want to talk about. That's yeah, at least also important to think about. But that also, yeah, it depends also on context where you present, because it's a very different thing if you play sort of in a serious music concert hall where everyone is seated and no one dares to cough. But well, or if you're playing in a punk rock bar, where yeah, there's different sort of aesthetics that play into how the audience wants to receive or is receiving what you're doing.
And in my experience, I mean, interactive dance is an interesting case study in that respect, because you have, I mean, you have the normal context of dance where the dancers move to music, and then you introduce interactivity into the picture, and then suddenly a point has to be made that this is interactive. The dancers are actually making the music, so that someone or so that the audience will understand
Yeah.
that they are not just moving to the music. So
Yeah.
it's quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean,
because you kind of need to get that across in a sense, and the strategy that's often, I mean, for dancers to do that is to introduce, for instance, stillness,
Mhm.
long periods of stillness, so that it's kind of, this is really hard to do without any, without any music to
Mhm.
cue it.
Yeah. No, that's the case study I did with Roosna and Vlak. Yeah, we also talked a little bit about that, how they were dealing with that. So, I mean, the way they work, they've been working since 2014 with these kinds of technologies. And they have specific pieces where it's really about this interaction, and they try to also make it clear that this is what's happening by sort of very sort of clearly putting like the sensor on. Even then, not all of the audience gets it, that's what's going on. But what I also found interesting in the interview with them was that they said, well, like in some of the other pieces, we just use it as one of the possible tools we can use to make a dance performance. And I found that also an interesting shift, because I think a lot of work in dance has been sort of like, well, what can we do with this new technology and how does that work? Whereas the shift to sort of like, well, it's actually in some ways it's an easier way of doing things than actually doing this tight cueing that is so common in dance. I found that a very interesting shift. Um, and then, I mean, the other thing which in dance is often also, which is maybe less legible immediately for audience, but is that it gives them a very different sense of the body. So, and that influences then again how they create the movement. So it has an influence on a more subtle influence on the aesthetics of the dance. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for the presentation. I was thinking about the one of the slides that you say there's the need for a common vocabulary to address this. And in terms of what else should be in a book, I was thinking that maybe listening is an important part. You know, if you think about Pierre Schaeffer and reduced listening aspects, you know, that gives you a way to listen to sound and to music, and from that to retrieve specific information or to relate to sound in that way. So if you strip down all the technology, and technology gets obsolete very fast, if you're just listening to things, maybe you can get a way to develop the mapping with your own tools. You know, one way to understand the example that you've shown is with that beautiful example, but another way is just by listening and okay, maybe there is a square wave going on here and filters. And maybe the basis to understand the mapping of this just by listening might be interesting. And then you can replicate with your own tools instead of using that same tools, that same algorithm. And I would think that approach probably could be interesting. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Maria. I have lots of comments and references, but that'll be for the lunch break. Thank you very much for now. Now, before lunch, we have Michael Kuchniuk. Thank you. That was his surname. There's a glitch in my speech pattern there. To present these lovely entities, robotic entities in the back, interactive rhythmic robots. So I'm very excited about that. After Michael's presentation, there will be lunch.
Okay, hi. My name is Mike, and I'm here with quite a few of my colleagues from the University of beautiful Oslo, Norway, where we are all affiliated with the Ritmo Center for Interdisciplinary Studies in Rhythm, Time, and Motion. And as you heard, we are responsible for this installation that you see in the very back corner of the room here, and some of you may have already interacted with it, and we invite all of you to interact with it if you haven't already. And I just want to tell you a little bit about what's going on with it so you know what to do when you go back there. So we have these musical tapping robots. They basically just tap out rhythms on whatever surface you set them on. And we have them sitting on some glockenspiels back there, so you'll hear them playing glockenspiel music. And then we have this wooden sign on the floor. And if you tap out a beat on that sign, the robots will try to synchronize with the tempo of your tapping. And if you stop tapping your foot, then the robots will stop playing. And then we also have a couple of Myo armband sensors, which have already come up a few times in this conference. But if you wear the sensors on your arms, then you can sort of control the music that the robots are generating. I should maybe say you influence the music they're generating. Yeah. So basically you tap your foot and you wave your arms. And maybe I'll just play you a quick video of what that looks like so you have an idea of what you're supposed to do. Yeah, I think that's enough of that. The setup we have back there, yeah, thanks. The setup we have is a little bit different than this one. This was kind of a little bit older, but what we have back there, I think sounds really nice. And to me, it feels really fantastic to use it, especially once you get used to it. So I really like using it. I hope you really like using it. And yeah, please check it out after I'm done talking on your lunch break or one of the breaks later today. And then I should say also that we have a survey, and it would be a big help for us after you interact with it. If you could take our survey, you'd really be contributing in a meaningful way to our research if you did that. And if you go back there, I've printed out some little cards that have this URL on it, yeah, where you can photograph this. And I'll put this back up again at the end of my talk so you can see it. So yeah, please play with the robots and fill out the survey. I think that's all I want to say about the installation as such. I don't think it really benefits from being over-explained. But what I do want to just briefly talk about some of the reasons that I built these robots to begin with. The robots are called Dr. Squiggles, by the way. And the simple answer to the reason why I built these is because this was kind of the simplest thing that I could think of that would allow me to study a range of questions that I'm interested in. And when I say this is the simplest thing I can build, it really is just a pile of solenoids connected to a Raspberry Pi in there. So it's mechanically trivial. And being able to cut out some mechanical complexity makes it easier to study other things. And the things I'm interested in, well, I'm interested in human-robot interaction, how do humans interact with these things, and I'm also interested in how these robots interact with each other. And I think today I'm just going to tell you about some of the human-robot interaction questions that I'm interested in. And maybe I want to show you a quick video of what my normal setup looks like because I'm not normally using the muscle sensors. That's something that's special for today. Normally what I have are these robots listening through contact microphones. So they kind of just listen to one thing. And in this setup, I have one robot listening to what the person is playing, and then I have the other robots listening to the first robot. And they're programmed in this video to sort of adapt to what they hear. So they're kind of trying to mimic what they hear. They're not literally repeating what they hear, but they're trying to kind of statistically play something that's similar to what they hear. So you'll hear the person playing a rhythm and the other robots adapting to that. Yeah. So that's this kind of the setup I use when I study human-robot interaction in this context. And just broadly, the questions that I have are like, what makes some activities fun? Like, why do some people voluntarily spend long amounts of time, sometimes over the course of their whole life, like, and derive great enjoyment from certain activities? And how do you design a system like this to be maximally fun so that people are actually motivated to use it? And then once you've designed a system that's fun, how can you leverage that system to help people actually gain skills or achieve goals that they have set for themselves? And in this context, I sort of think of, fun and improvement as being in this feedback loop. Because if you are learning a new skill and you get a little bit better at it, then you will naturally enjoy it more. And if you enjoy it more, you might be more motivated to practice. And if you practice more, you should be getting better. The caveat there is that despite whatever Malcolm Gladwell told you, just spending time practicing doesn't necessarily make you better. You also have to practice in the right way. So there's a design question here, which is how do you design an interactive system to nudge people in the direction of doing those behaviors that are actually going to make them better, right? How do you, like, that's kind of the thing that completes this feedback loop is you have to help people practice in the right way. You have to make it fun to do the thing that makes you better. And there are really two demographics that I'm interested in studying at the moment. The first is amateur musicians, people who play musical instruments at home as a hobby. To get better at your instrument, you really have to do these, well, one of the things you have to do are rhythmic drills. Okay, I did such drills for years and years in my undergraduate. A lot of people find them to be tedious and boring. And I think a lot of people wouldn't have done them if they didn't really have to do them for their exams and so forth. But maybe we can design a system that makes it fun, fun to play rhythms with the robot. And while the person is there playing rhythms with the robot, maybe we're also helping them gain rhythm-related skills that will help make them better on their instrument more generally. And the other group of people that I'm interested in are kids with developmental coordination disorder, which, if you don't know, DCD is sort of a pathological clumsiness that you see in kids, and it's massively underdiagnosed. Something like 5% of kids are thought to have developmental coordination disorder, and they struggle in particular with tasks involving very precise timing. So yeah, and they also really hate practicing timing related activities because they know that they're not good at these activities because they're tormented in school all the time for the way they perform on movement related and timing related activities. But again, maybe we can design a toy that's fun to use, a rhythmic toy that's fun to use that they might want to use just because they're intrinsically motivated to play with it. But then while they're there playing with it, maybe there's some way that we can help them gain skills that might actually help them in their daily lives. Okay, I think that's all I'm going to say about that for now. So yeah, in conclusion, please play with the robots and please fill out the survey when you're done.